In the serene coastal town of Palm Coast, Florida, a shocking tragedy shattered the peace when a young mother was found dead in her home. What began as a heart-wrenching tale of suicide quickly spiraled into a dark investigation, revealing deep-seated deception and a desperate fight for justice. Join us as we unravel the chilling events that led to Brandi Celenza's untimely death and the shocking secrets behind her seemingly perfect life. Stay with me as we unravel the real truth. Welcome to Fatal Affairs, a channel solely focused on bringing daily told and untold crime cases on love, betrayal, and revenge. Thanks to all our viewers and subscribers for your unwavering support, and please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for future updates. We would really appreciate that. Palm Coast, Florida, was a quiet coastal town where life moved at a steady pace. But in April 2018, a tragedy unfolded that would shake the entire community to its core. A young mother, Brandi Celenza, was found dead in her own home. What initially seemed like a suicide would quickly unravel into a tale of deception, control, and a desperate fight for justice. Brandi Celenza was a devoted mother, full of life and fiercely protective of her son. At just 25 years old, she had big dreams and a determination to create a stable and happy life for her child. To those who knew her, she was kind-hearted and resilient, always putting others before herself. She was married to Keith Johansen, a man who to outsiders appeared to be a loving husband. Keith had a background in the military, having served in the Air Force Reserves. Professionally, he studied business and accounting at Bellevue Community College and completed a sheet metal apprenticeship program. He eventually became the president of Johansen Mechanical, Inc., a family-owned business in Woodinville, Washington. But behind closed doors, their marriage was far from perfect. Friends and family grew concerned over the years, witnessing signs of control, tension, and emotional distress in Brandi's life. She had confided in some that she wanted to leave Keith, but like many victims of domestic abuse, she felt trapped. On April 7, 2018, a chilling 911 call came into Flagler County Emergency Services. It was Keith Johansen, his voice frantic. He claimed that Brandi had shot herself while he was in the shower. Police and paramedics arrived within minutes, but it was already too late. Brandi was dead. She had suffered 2 gunshot wounds, one to her chest and a second, fatal shot to her right breast. Something about the scene felt off to investigators. A self-inflicted gunshot wound is almost always singular. The presence of 2 wounds immediately cast doubt on Johansen's claims. A crime scene that didn't add up. As officers combed through the home, they discovered even more inconsistencies. If Brandi had truly shot herself, where was the gun positioned? How could she have fired twice? And why did certain elements of the scene suggest an attempt to stage events? Detectives also discovered a crucial piece of evidence, the home's surveillance system. The cameras had captured more than Johansen had realized, and when investigators reviewed the footage, what they found would change the course of the case. In the footage, Brandi and Keith were seen arguing just minutes before the shots rang out. Their relationship had been volatile for some time, and this was not the first time loud fights had erupted between them. Neighbors had heard raised voices in the past, but no one had imagined it would end in tragedy. More importantly, the surveillance system captured the critical moment when the gun was fired. Though the camera angle did not provide a clear view of the act itself, the timing contradicted Johansen's claim that he had been in the shower. It suggested that he had been right there, in the same room, when Brandi was shot. Brandi had been afraid. This much was clear from the evidence detectives uncovered. Text messages, emails, and conversations with friends revealed that she had been trying to leave. She had confided in close friends that she felt trapped, that Keith controlled her life, and that she was scared of what he might do. One friend recalled a chilling conversation just weeks before the murder. Brandi had said, "If anything ever happens to me, it was Keith." Her words would later serve as a haunting reminder of the danger she had been in. As the case against Keith Johansen grew stronger, authorities knew they had enough evidence to act. On April 27, 2018, just 20 days after Brandi's death, Johansen was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. His demeanor at the time of his arrest was cold and unbothered. He maintained his innocence, insisting that Brandi had taken her own life. But investigators weren't buying it. They had built a strong case, and they believed the evidence would be enough to convict him. Now, all eyes turned to the courtroom, where Johansen's defense team would do everything they could to cast doubt on the prosecution's case. The battle for justice was just beginning. Following Keith Johansen's arrest, investigators worked tirelessly to build an airtight case. Despite his claims of innocence, the mounting evidence painted a grim picture of the events that led to Brandi Celenza's death. The first major blow to Johansen's version of events came from the medical examiner. The autopsy confirmed what detectives had already suspected. Brandi's injuries were inconsistent with suicide. She had suffered 2 gunshot wounds, which alone raised serious doubts. The trajectory of the bullets suggested she had been shot from an angle inconsistent with self-infliction. Moreover, there were no powder burns on Brandi's hands, a key detail that indicated she had not fired the gun herself. This, coupled with the surveillance footage and witness testimonies, reinforced the belief that Brandi had been murdered. Brandi's friends and family began to speak out, providing further insight into her troubled relationship with Keith Johansen. Text messages, social media exchanges, and personal accounts painted a chilling picture of a man obsessed with control. Friends recalled how Brandi had become increasingly withdrawn in the months leading up to her death. She had confided in close friends that she wanted to leave Johansen, but was afraid of what he might do. A neighbor reported hearing a heated argument on the night of the shooting, followed by a chilling silence. A particularly damning piece of evidence came from a coworker who testified that Brandi feared for her life and had even begun making plans to leave Johansen permanently. These revelations added weight to the theory that Brandi had not taken her own life. She had been trying to escape an abusive relationship, and it had cost her everything. The murder weapon itself was another crucial piece of evidence. A forensic analysis revealed that the gun had been wiped clean of fingerprints, an odd discovery if Brandi had truly used it on herself. Additionally, the placement of the weapon did not align with standard suicide patterns. Instead of being found near her dominant hand, it was positioned several feet away from her body. These inconsistencies only strengthened the prosecution's case. Every new piece of evidence pointed to the same conclusion. Keith Johansen had murdered Brandi and attempted to stage the scene to look like a suicide. As the investigation continued, Johansen's version of events began to change. At first, he had claimed that he was in the shower when he heard the gunshots, but under pressure from law enforcement, his story started to unravel. At one point, he suggested Brandi had been playing with the gun when it accidentally discharged. Later, he implied that she had been distraught over personal issues, despite text messages showing she was making plans for the future. His body language and inconsistent statements during interrogations further convinced detectives that he was hiding the truth. The sheer number of contradictions in his statements only solidified the case against him. With overwhelming evidence in hand, prosecutors moved forward with second-degree murder charges against Keith Johansen. The case was shaping up to be a fierce legal battle. The defense would argue that Brandi had taken her own life, while the prosecution would present a case built on science, witness testimony, and surveillance footage that told a much darker story. Brandi's family vowed to fight for justice, ensuring that the truth of what had happened to their beloved daughter, sister, and mother would be told in court. Now, it was up to a jury to determine whether Keith Johansen would face the consequences of his actions. The highly anticipated trial of Keith Johansen began with intense media attention. The prosecution and defense were ready to present their arguments before the jury, each determined to control the narrative of Brandi Celenza's tragic death. The courtroom was packed with spectators, including Brandi's grieving family and friends, all desperate for justice. The prosecution opened with a powerful statement. Brandi Celenza did not take her own life. She was murdered in cold blood by the man who was supposed to love and protect her. They laid out the evidence, from the inconsistencies in Johansen's statements to the forensic findings that contradicted his claims. They painted him as a controlling, manipulative partner who had finally acted on his violent tendencies when Brandi tried to leave. The defense, in contrast, argued that Brandi had been struggling emotionally and had tragically taken her own life. They attempted to introduce doubt, focusing on her past struggles and suggesting that law enforcement had been too quick to label Johansen a murderer. They insisted that the evidence was circumstantial and that the prosecution's case was built on speculation rather than fact. The prosecution wasted no time presenting their mountain of evidence. They began with the forensic findings. The medical examiner took the stand and confirmed that the gunshot wounds were inconsistent with suicide. The absence of powder residue on Brandi's hands and the angle of the shots strongly suggested she had not fired the weapon herself. Experts testified that the position of the gun, several feet from Brandi's body, was highly unusual for a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Additionally, the blood spatter patterns indicated that Brandi had been shot from a distance, not at close range. The most damning evidence came from the home's security cameras. The footage captured the argument between Brandi and Keith shortly before the gunshots were heard. It also contradicted Johansen's timeline, showing that he was in the room with Brandi when the shots were fired. Several key witnesses took the stand to speak about Brandi's life and her relationship with Johansen. Brandi's best friend. She testified that Brandi had been terrified of Keith and had repeatedly expressed her desire to leave him. The friend recalled a chilling conversation where Brandi said, "If anything happens to me, it was Keith." A tearful testimony from Brandi's mother painted a heartbreaking picture of a daughter who had been desperately trying to escape an abusive relationship. A coworker revealed that Brandi had secretly started saving money and making plans to move out, evidence that contradicted the defense's claim that she had been suicidal. The defense attempted to poke holes in the prosecution's case, but they struggled against the overwhelming evidence. They called a psychologist to testify about Brandi's past emotional struggles, but the prosecution countered by introducing text messages and conversations that showed she had been optimistic about the future. Johansen himself took the stand in his own defense. He repeated his original claim that Brandi had shot herself, but under cross-examination, his inconsistencies became glaring. The prosecution methodically exposed contradictions in his statements, and his credibility crumbled. After weeks of emotional testimony, the jury was sent to deliberate. The prosecution had presented a compelling case while the defense had relied on creating doubt. The question remained, would the jury see through Johansen's lies? As the deliberations stretched into the night, Brandi's family sat in anxious anticipation. Justice was within reach, but they knew nothing was certain until the verdict was read. After intense deliberations, the jury finally reached a decision. The courtroom was silent as the judge prepared to read the verdict. Brandi Celenza's family clutched each other's hands, bracing for the moment that would determine whether justice would be served. The tension in the air was palpable, every eye fixed on the foreperson as they prepared to speak. The media cameras flashed, capturing the weight of the moment as the entire nation seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. The judge asked the jury for their decision. The foreperson stood, clearing their throat before announcing, "We, the jury, find the defendant, Keith Johansen, guilty of second-degree murder." Gasps rippled through the courtroom, followed by quiet sobs from Brandi's loved ones. A wave of emotion washed over her family, tears of relief mixed with sadness. The long, grueling journey to justice had finally come to an end. Some members of the jury glanced at Johansen as if expecting a reaction, but he remained stone-faced, his body tense with disbelief. Johansen sat frozen, his face pale as the weight of the verdict sank in. He shook his head in defiance, still unwilling to accept the truth that had been so clearly laid out before him. Johansen's defense attorney requested an immediate appeal, but the prosecution stood firm in their belief that the trial had been fair and that justice had been rightly served. The judge nodded solemnly, acknowledging the process but making it clear that Johansen would remain in custody as the legal proceedings continued. During the sentencing phase, Brandi's mother took the stand to deliver a powerful victim impact statement. Through tears, she described the profound loss of her daughter, the agony of knowing she had suffered in fear, and the pain of living without her. Her voice trembled as she spoke of Brandi's kindness, her dreams, and the future she had been cruelly robbed of. "She was my heart," Brandi's mother whispered. "She was my everything. And because of you, Mr. Johansen, my life will never be the same. My family will never be the same. I will never hear her voice again, never see her smile, never hold her in my arms. And you sit there with no remorse, no shame, as if her life meant nothing to you." Brandi's best friend also took the stand, recounting the years they had spent together, the laughter, the inside jokes, and the plans for the future that would never be realized. She turned to Johansen and, in a voice filled with anger and sorrow, declared, "You don't deserve to walk free while she's gone. You took everything from her, and now you'll finally pay the price." The judge, in a stern and deliberate tone, addressed Johansen directly. You manipulated, controlled, and ultimately took the life of a young woman who trusted you. The evidence presented in this court has left no doubt that Brandi Celenza did not take her own life. You took it from her. With that, the judge sentenced Keith Johansen to life in prison without the possibility of parole. A collective sigh of relief spread through Brandi's supporters. Some clutched each other in embrace, some wept openly, while others simply closed their eyes, finally able to breathe after years of torment. Justice had been served, but the scars of her loss would never fully heal. In the weeks following the trial, Brandi's family and friends honored her memory in the best way they knew how, by raising awareness about domestic violence and advocating for stronger protections for victims. They established the Brandi Celenza Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to helping those trapped in abusive relationships, offering counseling services, emergency shelter assistance, and legal aid for those seeking to escape dangerous situations. Brandi's story became a rallying cry for change, inspiring survivors to speak out and seek help before it was too late. Domestic violence awareness campaigns gained traction, and local legislators began pushing for reforms in protection laws, ensuring that victims would have better support and resources at their disposal. Several documentary filmmakers reached out to the Celenza family, hoping to share Brandi's story with a wider audience. Interviews were conducted with family members, friends, and investigators who had worked on the case, ensuring that her story would not be forgotten. The case became a landmark example of the importance of forensic science in uncovering the truth and holding perpetrators accountable. The trial of Keith Johansen highlighted the importance of believing victims, recognizing the signs of abuse, and taking action before tragedy strikes. It also underscored the power of forensic evidence in uncovering the truth and ensuring that justice is served. The prosecution's dedication, the unwavering love of Brandi's family, and the meticulous work of law enforcement had all contributed to ensuring that her killer was brought to justice. As the years passed, Brandi's name remained a symbol of resilience. Her family, though forever grieving, found solace in knowing that the man who took her life was behind bars, unable to hurt anyone else. They continued their mission, spreading awareness and advocating for victims, knowing that each life they helped save was a testament to Brandi's enduring spirit. Though she was gone, Brandi's legacy lived on, not just in the hearts of those who loved her, but in the lives of those she helped through her story. The conviction of Keith Johansen brought a sense of closure to many, but for those closest to Brandi Celenza, the pain of her loss continued to weigh heavily on their hearts. Justice had been served, yet the echoes of that fateful night lingered in every memory, every space she had once occupied. For her family and friends, moving forward meant carrying her story and ensuring that her death was not in vain. In the months following the trial, Brandi's parents found themselves grappling with a mix of emotions: relief that her killer was behind bars, but also an unbearable void that could never be filled. Her mother, once full of life and laughter, found it difficult to go through the motions of daily life. The sound of Brandi's voice, once so vibrant and full of dreams, now only existed in old voicemails and fading memories. Brandi's best friend, Jessica, found herself unable to visit the places they used to frequent together. The coffee shop where they would spend hours talking, the park where they had once planned their futures. It all felt empty without her. She often found herself reaching for her phone, ready to text Brandi about something trivial, only to be met with the crushing realization that she would never receive a response. Jessica channeled her grief into activism, speaking at domestic violence awareness events, and sharing Brandi's story in hopes of preventing others from experiencing similar tragedies. Brandi's case had captivated the nation, but within her own community, the impact was even more profound. Schools and local organizations held workshops on recognizing toxic behavior, and domestic violence hotlines saw an increase in calls from people seeking help. The Brandi Celenza Foundation, formed by her family, gained national recognition, receiving donations and support from people all over the country. It became a safe haven for those in dangerous relationships, offering legal assistance, shelter, and emotional support to those in need. While Brandi's loved ones worked to honor her memory, Keith Johansen faced a starkly different reality. Sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, he found himself in a world far removed from the control and manipulation he had once wielded over Brandi. Inside the prison walls, he was no longer the one in control. His attempts to appeal his conviction were quickly dismissed, and he became just another inmate serving out his time. Reports from those inside suggested that Johansen kept to himself, avoiding altercations but also receiving little sympathy from fellow inmates. The nature of his crime had made him a pariah, even among hardened criminals. Despite his conviction, Johansen never publicly admitted to his guilt. In letters intercepted by authorities, he maintained that he had been wrongfully accused and misunderstood, but no amount of denial could change the overwhelming evidence that had led to his conviction. He was now a man trapped in a reality he had created for himself, forever defined by the crime he had committed. Despite the legal closure of the case, questions still lingered. How had things escalated so quickly? Could Brandi have been saved if someone had intervened sooner? Were there signs that had been overlooked? Her family wrestled with these thoughts, knowing that while they could not change the past, they could use their pain to help others recognize danger before it was too late. In interviews, Brandi's mother often spoke of the moments leading up to her daughter's death. She wondered if there was something she had missed, a sign, a plea for help. But those who knew Brandi best assured her that this was not her burden to bear. Brandi had been caught in a web of manipulation and control, and the blame rested solely on the shoulders of the man who had taken her life. Though Brandi was gone, her story continued to touch lives. Survivors of abusive relationships reached out to her family, sharing their own experiences and expressing gratitude for the awareness her case had brought. Every year, on the anniversary of her passing, candlelight vigils were held in her honor. People gathered to remember her, to share stories, and to reaffirm their commitment to fighting domestic violence. Her memory lived on, not just in the hearts of those who knew her, but in the countless lives she had helped save through her tragic story. As her mother once said during an interview, "Brandi may not be here physically, but she is still making a difference. And as long as we keep fighting for her, she will never truly be gone." If we can save even one life, then Brandi's legacy will have made a difference, she often said. Brandi's father, once reluctant to speak publicly, had also become a voice for change. He worked closely with law enforcement agencies, helping train officers to better recognize and respond to domestic abuse cases. He channeled his grief into action, refusing to let his daughter's story fade into a mere statistic. Some states implemented Brandi's law, aimed at closing loopholes that had allowed dangerous individuals to slip through the cracks of the legal system. The law strengthened protective orders, provided more resources for victims, and introduced mandatory relationship safety education in schools. We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments section below. And if you found this story insightful, please subscribe and leave us a like. We would really appreciate that.